Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. Welcome back to part 3 of my root over temple Ficus benjamina. Today I'm going to be repotting the tree from this fancy clay pot into this round terracotta pot. I found both the tree and the pot looks lost in this large rectangular pot. It just puts too much emphasis on the landscape and not on the temple and the ficus. I used to have it planted in this terracotta training pot, and it looked much better in this pot. The emphasis was on the temple and the tree and not the landscape and the pot. So I'm going to put it back into my round terracotta pot. This tree is never really easy to repot because it's fairly heavy, this temple. So my first step is to get it out of the existing pot, get it onto the table and comb out the roots. So here I go. So I'll try and grab the tree by the temple, wiggle it, see if it's loose. Yes, it is. Get my hand underneath and lift it out of the pot. Just like that. So last time I repotted this tree, I put it into pure perlite, thinking that would be a nice lightweight soil. It'd make the entire planting lighter. I think the perlite held too much water. I think it needs the clay particles in it. So I'll return back to my original soil mix. This original soil mix of perlite is still in really good shape, so I'm going to reuse it. I'll put it in my used soil bin. Yeah, it's very wet, this soil. Shallow pots don't have a lot of drainage in the first place. I'm hoping that the roots haven't grown so much that I can't fit it in the round pot. I'm hoping I don't have to do a lot of root pruning, but we'll see. So I'm just going to move it a little more central on the table here, and then I'll start combing out the roots. I've got all my root tools, so here I go. I'll start by combing out the soil. Quite a windy day today. Lots of fine roots in here, that's good. The tree did grow really well. As you can see, the roots haven't reached out into that large pot. They're kind of all around the temple, all the fine roots, so that's really good. It means the root base is nice and compact. I think it'll be no problems getting it into the old pot, my terracotta pot. Terracotta pots also suck out a lot of water out of the soil, so it should be quite good for the roots. It should keep them a little more on the drier side, which ficus roots, they don't like to be wet all the time. It's best with ficus to kind of let the soil go a bit on the dry side, not totally dry, but a bit on the dry side, then water them thoroughly, water and fertilize. Then you let them kind of dry out again, and then you give them another thorough watering and fertilization. And that keeps the ficus really, really happy. They sure don't like to be sitting in wet soil all the time. So this tree is totally integrated with the temple now. You can see this root that actually grew through the temple and broke it open. They come from out inside the temple here and go around. So there's no danger of, the tree popping off the temple. So I'm going to move it now, clean up all the old soil, and try it out in the new pot. I was looking at my terracotta pot. It's in really, really good shape. There is a slight chip at the back here, and I will put that at the back behind the temple so you don't see it. But other than that, it's lasted me really well. This is this terracotta pot, which is just an under tray for a bigger pot, and I drilled holes in it. It has got to be at least over 20 years old, maybe even 25. So it stood up really well. I only use it for tropical trees. If you put a hardy tree in here, the first good freeze, it'll just crack and break apart. But They're good training pots for tropical trees, that's for sure. So I'll put the old pot out here on the pile of pots. That should be good. It is warm right now, but tonight it's going down to 4 degrees Celsius, 4 degrees above freezing, which is getting pretty cold. I'll have to put all my tropicals in the greenhouses, put the heat on. I was looking at the picture of my tree planted in this pot way back from 2014, and I had the bottom of the temple level with the lip of the pot. I didn't have it raised up, and I think that looked about right. So I'll do the same today. And I was thinking, right now the temple sits on top of the soil and it kind of compresses the soil underneath the temple. So I was thinking of maybe putting some blocks of wood under the temple to raise it up so the weight of the temple is on the bottom of the pot, not compressing the soil down. It might make it harder for the roots to grow in there. I don't know. So that's what I'll do. I found some end scraps from when I was working on the plant room, and I think that'll work quite nicely. They're just, 2x4s. Scraps. I can place them like that, set the temple on top. I think that'll be perfect. I'm going to put my drainage screens in the pot, fill it with a base layer of soil up to the height of these blocks, and then I can place the temple on top and kind of position it. I think that'll work out quite nicely. So here I go. One for the middle and one for here. I'm going to add the new soil now. I've got my dust mask on because it's usually a very dusty operation and it's not good to breathe in this bonsai soil. So here I go. I think my blocks are placed quite well. Yeah, I think that's good. So I'll start adding the soil now. This is new bonsai soil. It's my usual mix of half perlite, half safety zorb, and chunks of reptile bark thrown in, which is a fir bark. It seems to work quite well. I've used this soil for over 15 years now, and all my trees seem to be nice and healthy in it. They seem to grow as fast as any other soil, so I keep using it because I can get it locally and it's fairly inexpensive. I think I will place the temple on top first. That way I can see what roots are overhanging the pot, and I can always do the root pruning while it's in place. So here I go. So this temple was built on top of a tile, like a floor tile, and I made it myself out of rocks that I collected. I collected as many rectangular rocks as I could find. All right, so here I go. I'm just going to place it on the soil, hoping all my roots are in place here. I think they are. Okay. I'm going to place the planting on top of my spinning tree bonsai turntable. That way I can rotate it around and see it from all angles and then adjust the temple position. Sure looks better in that smaller pot. It makes the temple look huge. The tree looks much, much bigger. It certainly suits it much better than that large landscape pot. The height seems pretty good. I've got stones like, well, there's my tile there, which is higher than the lip of the pot. Maybe I've got to try and lower it down a bit more. I think I must have soil underneath here because this part of the tile is lower than the front here. Maybe I've got to lift it up and see what's going on underneath this planting. Like, I don't want it too high in the pot. Yeah, I've got a bit of soil under here I got to get rid of. Soil and roots. So that is a bit better now. Okay, so I think that's lowered it down just a bit, which helps. And then I've got to slide it over a bit to there maybe. Have a look. Well, that certainly looks good. These roots have kind of separated a bit from the temple here. Kind of floating in midair. I'll have to get them tucked in nice and close to the temple. Yeah, maybe this way just a little more. Still out the back. Maybe just a little more. It's nice in a round pot to have a bit of asymmetry, which it has now. I think that's looking good. Yeah, I like having a bit more room on this side of the temple. Kind of matches the roots. Now, I'm looking front to back, so I have the possibility of moving the whole planting towards the back of the pot. I definitely have space for roots back here, so I could do that. And I think I should. It gives a little more landscape room to the front. Let me try it. So I'll pull it back. Back to maybe here. See how that looks. Not sure I like that. It gives maybe too much room up here. I think the whole idea of this planting was to get, to minimize the landscape around the pyramid or the temple. So I think that is not a good idea. I think I've got to keep it forward or sort of balanced in the pot. Sort of there's the side view, so I've got it. If anything, I'm a little towards the front. I'll move it back just a bit. There, that's about equal now. I think that looks better. The slope kind of continues down better. I better mist these roots while I'm doing all this work so they don't dry out. I'm checking the planting out from all angles, making sure it looks good from above like this, and I think it is. Front to back looks good. I'm a little tight here. It's not too bad. I could bring it over just a bit more central, keeping it offset just a bit. I think I will. Just move it a bit, a little more room for these roots. They're kind of very close to the edge of the pot, whereas these ones have a little more room. So yeah, maybe, this much. I think that's good. Okay, I think that's a good position for the tree. I think it looks good. So now I've got to do my root work, make sure everything gets into the soil or is trimmed off. So let's begin that. I'll begin out front here. So I've got some fine roots here. They can be trimmed off. They'll regrow very quickly. So I'll just trim them off so they're not overhanging the lip of the pot. And then I'll kind of put everything into the soil. And I've got to make sure all the roots are pressed against the temple. And I've got to get any weeds out too. This is the time to weed your trees when you're repotting them. Get rid of all those weeds that plague you. This one. So these roots are quite long and they're fine. So again, I'll trim them off. I don't want, it divides from 1 to 3 here. I don't want the one sticking straight out front, so I'll take that off. I think that's going to look much better. And any roots that I can, reposition and fix up, I will. I'll try. There's a lot of roots that, quite random looking. Push that one up against the temple more like that. Now, in behind here I have, there's a root coming out the back here that's kind of stopping it, pressing it more against the temple. And I'm dividing from 1 into 3 here. I'm thinking that maybe I don't need that back one. I'm quite sure I don't, so I'm going to take that off. So here I go. Like that. Taking that root off. Now I can position this closer to the temple, which will look a lot nicer. I can get all these roots into the soil here. Maybe with a little bit of trimming, just prune some of the finer hairs off. Finer roots, root hairs. Kind of get it into the soil. This one into the soil. like that. This one's being repositioned slightly more upright or pressed against the temple. Now, we're coming around here. There's one off to the side here that's looking good. This one is fine. Just needs positioning in the soil here. Maybe I shouldn't have filled my soil up quite so full. I need to kind of top dress it after all these roots get in place. This one, here's one. Again, I have a root here that's kind of pushing against the temple. So I need to prune that one off. And I think it's just one root. Yes, it is. So take that one off. Here I go. Like that. There. Now I can position that one closer to the temple. And that will look much, much better. So I think I have most of these roots into the soil nicely, without doing a lot of root pruning, just sort of fixing up some of those roots that were making the roots spring away from the temple a bit. These ones will have to be held in place maybe with a stone or something until they start growing in the new soil. The back ones are good. That one, again, I could put a stone there to hold it in place. These ones are staying in place nicely. Yeah, so I think, maybe the soil will hold that in place. It's not too bad. So I think that's good. I think the next step is to start kind of putting the soil around the roots. All right, here I go with the soil. I'm going to start at the back here. See if that root holds in place with just the soil. Hoping I don't have to hold it in place with a rock, but if I do, I do. No, I do have to. So I'm going to have to put a rock against this root to hold it in place. It's just, unless I reposition it. You can see these two roots kind of curl around one. I wonder if I can put it over here. In here. And I can. That actually fits better. So I'll put it down in here. I think that'll be even better. And it holds in place. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that looks better in that position. So I'll keep adding my soil in here. Kind of piling it up at the back a bit more. This is all good here. This is all held in place nicely. The front, that's all pretty good. That'll stay in place. And there's just these side ones that could be pushed over more. Yeah, they kind of pop out a bit. Not too badly, but I think I need something against there. Everything else is working quite nicely. This one looks pretty good. Oops, I just pulled a root out with it. Get that back in. If I can kind of bury this rock in here and wedge it against the edge of the pot and the root, it'll push it in place. Just like that. If I can get it buried even lower, it'll be less noticeable. Hope you can see that. So there. So the root is being held in place with the rock here. Sort of. More like that. There. That's good. It's nice and tight against the temple. Perfect. So now I just got to do the same with this one. So I think I'm going to dig this soil out of here. That's a pain in the neck having it this deep. So I can get the roots in there, push them against the temple, like that, and then I'll find a stone that fits in there too. Okay, I've got an assortment of stones. So I'm thinking, let's try the smallest one first. I think that's going to work. Yeah, that works nicely. I mean, there's a little bit of a spring there, but I throw some more soil in between the rock and the edge of the pot here. I think it'll push it up just perfect. And it does. See, that's pushed right up against the temple. Perfect. Okay. That has got all the roots in place. This one has a slight bit of spring. Can I do the same for this one? Maybe. Let me dig the soil out. See if I can get something wedged in there. This has got to be a very small stone. Something like that. Would that look okay? It's a little big, isn't it? I need to get a smaller stone. Let me see what I got. I've got a rock that Emily sent me. Maybe this one will work. Push it down like, oh yeah, that's working really nicely. Right like that. Perfect. So that's holding it in. This one's sticking up just a bit. Maybe a little pebble to hold that down. Maybe a pebble like that, eh? Yep, that works nicely. So that's pushed against there. I can backfill that to cover it up. Perfect. That's pushed against. This one's pushed against. This root kind of sticks out front a bit. So I've just got to get these two roots buried in the soil better. I'm going to give the planting a watering now. It's first watering since the repot. And then I'll start applying moss, both to the soil surface and around the temple. I'm stepping back now, having a final look before I water, just in case I need to adjust anything, if something's bothering me. And I don't see anything. I think it's looking quite nice. I've been thinking a lot about the pot color too. The reddish terracotta color, red is the opposite color of green. And so the red pot color makes the green look brighter, and the green makes the red look brighter. So it may not be a bad color for this planting, especially when you have the green moss on top of the soil here. A gray pot, maybe that would look too monotonous. The gray trunk, the gray temple, the gray pot. It probably would look nice, but maybe the red color just makes it stand out a little more. Maybe it just would to look all gray underneath. So maybe it needs a contrasting color to make everything up here stand out a bit more. It's a difficult thing. Colors of pots and everything. I mean, it looks nice to me, so I think we'll definitely keep it in the terracotta pot for a while, but I can always get a gray clay pot made up and then try it out and see if it looks better or if it doesn't. All right, here I go with the watering. Start right up top here, come down. Drainage is good. The water's not pooling up on the surface of the soil at all. And this watering can has a very high flow rate. It's gentle, but a high flow rate. Here's a look at the planting. I think, this soil level is maybe just a little bit high. I could reduce it in future once the roots get established, but I think for now, I'm going to leave it as is. I'm going to start the mossing now, so I think I'm going to start with the soil surface, get that all covered in moss, and then I'll start applying moss to the temple, various spots on it, all the nooks and crannies. Not too much moss. I want to display the temple, but I also want it to look like an ancient temple that's been lost in the middle of a rainforest. So I've got some moss I've been cultivating in this tray here. It's, you know, it's not real thin moss, but it's not real thick either. So I think it'll look fine. So I'm going to start kind of around the roots here, making sure I push the moss down really firmly into this new soil. Get it established. Like that. That looks good. I've got lots more moss now, so some of this moss is quite thick from that cedar tree. So I'm going to put the really thick moss around the back of the planting. So maybe right back in here. Nice big chunk of it. Or it doesn't matter quite so much because, you know, you're not going to see that in a show. It'll just be there a little bit. Make sure again it's firmly pushed down really hard into the soil. That there's no kind of air pockets or anything. Okay, so just a little bit around the edges now. Finish it off. Okay. Okay, the mossing is complete on the soil surface. So I'm going to give it a watering. Let's get it all settled in nicely. Push it down again once it's wet. And then I can go on to mossing up the temple. All right, here I go with the water. This is the back of the planting. Give it a good thorough soak, all the moss. Next, I want to make sure the moss is all pushed down into the soil. Seems to be pretty good. All right, so this is looking good. I'm going to start mossing up the temple now, kind of integrating it more with the landscape, putting moss in various places. So here I go. You can see cracks like this are just perfect for moss. So you just push a bit of moss in there, moss and soil, like that. So that looks really good. And you just want to apply it sparingly. There's a crack in the temple here. I can put some moss in the crack and it'll hold in there really nicely. Like that. The sun is shining. That's kind of nice. So you can see I've got some big voids in here to fill with moss. So I think I've got some really fluffy moss here that I can put in that giant hole there. I think I just stuff it in there. Try and kind of feed it in under the crack like that. Yeah. Like that, kind of filling that void. That looks good. I'm getting very close to finishing the mossing of the temple. I'm going to stand back and have a look at it and see if it needs any adjusting. Here's an overall look at the planting now. I think it's got a good level of moss on the temple. I think it looks just about right. I think on the left-hand side here, I could use a little bit more moss, just so it doesn't kind of come down so straight on that side. But other than that, I think it's looking quite nice. Maybe a little more moss at the bottom here and maybe a bit more over here. Just so the moss isn't quite so much of a straight line at the bottom of the temple. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good. I have in the past had a bit of rubble around the bottom to kind of look like the temple was crumbling a bit. I can look around and see if I have some rocks that are suitable, maybe place them, you know, kind of sink them into the moss here to further kind of integrate the temple with the terrain here. I've got a couple of stones here that are kind of rectangular. They might look quite nice. So I'd have to kind of bury them a bit. I got to kind of follow the angle of the temple. Maybe one right in here. So I'm going to kind of dig a section out of the moss here and then slide the stone in. Sort of like it's a continuation of the temple. Like that. Yeah, so it looks like the temple continues down. So after you've finished mossing a tree for the show, don't leave it out on your bench, because the first thing that'll happen is you'll wake up the next day and the birds will have picked all the moss away and it'll look terrible. You have to redo it all again. So try, if you have a place to protect the trees, try and do that, because fresh moss like this just seems to be a magnet for birds and animals to come in and pick around and see if there's anything good to eat underneath the moss. So I always put them in a greenhouse when they're ready for a show like this and just keep them in there where they're safe and sound. Let's fly in now and have a look at the root over temple Ficus benjamina. Because it's getting really cool tonight, I've stuffed my glass greenhouse full of plants. You can see the floor is just covered in bonsai. Lots and lots of them. The shelves up top are covered in bonsai. I've got the heat on now, so it'll keep it nice and warm in here tonight. And my poly house is also getting full. In the poly house here, I have lots of tropicals in here. They should stay, a little warmer. I won't heat this one, but if there is frost out, it won't affect the trees inside the greenhouse here. They'll be protected just enough. In the past, when it got cold like tonight, I used to have to bring all my tropicals from the benches, bring them all the way into the plant room on the house, keep them warm overnight, and then bring them all back out in the morning. It used to take about an hour and a half to do each operation, bringing them in and then back out again. And they're very heavy, so I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore. It's so much nicer having the two greenhouses. I can just bring them from the benches into the greenhouses and back out. It only takes me like 15 minutes. I really enjoyed working on my root over temple Ficus benjamina, getting it show ready. I think it's a big improvement getting it in the smaller pot. And that's all for today. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me in the Bonsai Zone.